Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into an absolutely massive biological mystery. It's a puzzle that's literally left scientists scratching their heads for decades. But thanks to a cutting-edge new framework, we actually finally have an answer.
So here's the central mystery we're looking at today. Why don't giant animals get more cancer? Think about it for a second. We know cancer is caused by cellular mutations, right? And giant animals have trillions upon trillions of cells, so statistically, shouldn't they be getting sick all the time? Well, it turns out they don't, and how they manage to avoid it could completely change the way we look at human medicine.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with the Peto paradox mystery itself, then move into the THD framework, look at the validation mechanisms, establish the falsification rules, and finally, wrap up with the real-world impact.
All right, part 1. The Peto paradox mystery.
In simple, everyday terms, Peto's paradox boils down to this. If every single cell in a body has a tiny, tiny chance of turning cancerous, then having more cells should naturally mean having more chances for cancer to develop. So big animals that live a long time should, logically, get sick at a much, much higher rate than small, short-lived animals. But, strangely enough, that is just not what happens in the wild. Just look at the sheer math here. An elephant has roughly 100 times more cells than a human being. 100 times! They also live for a really long time. So, based on basic probability, an elephant should have 100 times more risk of developing cancer than we do. But their actual cancer rates are incredibly low. In fact, they're often much lower than ours. This perfectly shows the clash between our old way of thinking and observed reality. The old linear model says more cells plus more time equals high cancer. But when we actually go out and look at nature, the reality is more cells plus more time equals low cancer. So clearly something is missing from our understanding. There's a hidden piece of the puzzle here.
Which brings us to part 2, Triune Harmonic Dynamics, or THD.
This groundbreaking framework comes from researcher, inventor, and author Kevin L. Brown. He developed Triune Harmonic Dynamics as a universal rule for exactly how things evolve, survive, and reorganize themselves. Brown's research really highlights that nature doesn't just passively exist, it actively responds to pressure through a repeating cycle of emergence, contrast, and integration.
We can actually break down THD's complex physics into 3 really simple steps. It's kind of like a rhythm of becoming. Step 1 is form, so a species grows larger, bringing way more cells into existence. Step 2 is transform. This massive size creates incredible biological pressure and huge cancer risk. And step 3 is integrate. To survive this immense pressure without just going completely extinct, the species has to build a new, integrated protective architecture.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it shifts our entire perspective. Large animals aren't just getting lucky, and they definitely aren't just passively carrying around all this cancer risk. Through the lens of THD, we see that they actively regulate that risk through evolution. The sheer pressure of being a giant literally forced them to evolve hidden biological security systems.
Let's move on to part 3, Validation and Test Mechanisms.
Because nature is incredibly creative, right? It doesn't just use one simple trick to fight cancer. It distributes this defense architecture totally differently in each species. For example, elephants survive by copying a specific tumor-suppressing gene called TP53 over and over again. Bowhead whales, which can live for well over 200 years, survived by evolving highly enhanced DNA repair systems. And naked mole rats, they use a thick, gooey cellular matrix called hyaluronin to literally block cancer cells from clumping together.
So, the crucial point is this. Peto's paradox isn't really a paradox at all. It's just a math equation that was missing a variable. And that missing variable is the THD integration phase. Large animals perfectly balance this massive cancer-causing pressure with powerful, newly evolved cancer-suppression architecture. And when we actually test this, the results are pretty amazing. If we take our old cancer models and just plug in these new defense variables, the mathematical paradox completely shrinks and disappears. Even better, in the lab, when scientists artificially enhance these suppression mechanisms in test subjects, their cancer risk visibly drops. The THD hypothesis perfectly matches the biological data.
All right, part 4, falsification parameters.
Now, we can't just guess that this is happening. We have to set strict rules. According to Kevin L. Brown's THD framework, any good science requires a test for failure. We have to measure 3 specific things: body size versus actual cancer rates, the physical presence of these enhanced security guard systems, and the predictive power of the model as a whole. And this brilliantly illustrates how strict true science actually is. If we go out into the wild tomorrow and find a giant long-lived species that has absolutely no extra biological suppression systems, the whole THD pressure transition model fails. If adding these biological defenses to our math doesn't explain the low cancer rates, well, the model is useless. But time and time again, the data holds strong.
Finally, let's wrap up with Part 5, Real-World Implications.
The big takeaway here isn't that doctors should be trying to turn humans into elephants or naked mole rats. That's not the goal. The real lesson from the THD framework is all about engineering. Nature's ultimate blueprint for survival is building layered, redundant suppression. Basically, when one defense fails, there's another one waiting right behind it to pick up the slack.
For human medicine, this means we need to attack cancer through multiple architectural layers. Think about it like this. We can look at the genetic layer for better risk detection, the cellular layer to improve how our DNA actually repairs itself, the immune layer making our internal surveillance network stronger, the metabolic layer reducing inflammation through our diet, and finally, the behavioral layer, which is simply reducing our daily exposure to toxins.
Let's move to and see how this builds a completely new picture of health. On the left, you've got massive evolutionary pressure, a really high expected risk from having a huge body or living a long life. In the middle, you have the THD integration phase. That's the strong, layered suppression architecture stepping up to the plate. And on the right, the result is beautifully low observed disease. The architecture completely absorbs the pressure.
Which leaves us with this final, genuinely incredible thought. Through Kevin L. Brown's Triune Harmonic Dynamics, we now know for a fact that nature builds hidden blueprints to defeat disease. Peto's paradox isn't a paradox anymore. It's a treasure map. So the big question is, how quickly can we unlock these architectural secrets to build a much healthier future for ourselves? Thank you so much for joining me today on this Explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.